The west is empty. All else is empty. No moon talk at all now. Only dark, listening to dark. How many of us have ever wanted to pilot a Starfighter? That dream of spaceflight merged with the promise of science fiction in one personalized cockpit, to go through the pre-flight checklist at the controls of a small, sleek, maneuverable craft like an X-Wing, maybe to help Luke Skywalker out of the Battle of Yavin, though maybe not as Porkins or Biggs, or to dive through capital ships in a Star Fury to keep Babylon 5 safe from the third space intrusion, to be the one selected to defend the frontier from Zur and the Kodan Armada, to get hit with maybe 5 or 6 different moral quandaries and doubt your own humanity in one hour-long episode as you buck G-forces in a Viper from Battlestar Galactica. Does the Wing Gundam's ability to transform from mobile suit into a fighter jet come across as a little too unrealistic for a cartoon show about a space war designed to sell model kits to teenagers? Maybe we're already starting to drift off topic. Hey! Hi. Been a while. Tell you what, before we get into it, why don't you like and subscribe this video? Okay? Cool. Thanks. Enjoy. The fantasy of the Starfighter is one I've been captivated with since I first saw Star Wars with my dad as a kid. I'm old, so I'm talking about A New Hope here. Game developers have been trying to bottle that feeling almost since video games have existed. Most of the early attempts at actually putting you in a cockpit were based around Star Wars, including the Star Wars arcade cabinet from 1983. This arcade tradition continues today, with one of the latest incarnations being the Star Wars Battle Pod, in which I took great pleasure at earning a coveted, loving yet exasperated eye roll from my girlfriend at the time when I sat down at the controls and went through the startup sequence for an X-Wing before I started to play, even though there weren't any buttons there to actually do so. Many of my earliest gaming memories are of Starfighter games. Rail shooting in Rebel Assault, memorizing routes to get gold medals in Rogue Squadron, getting motion sickness at the 360-degree levels in Descent. I've found that just about every Starfighter game that I've played, be it Freelancer or Free Space, have landed somewhere on a scale that can also be applied to most racing games, the sim versus the arcade. On the sim end of the spectrum, devs are usually going for a more realistic approach to piloting your craft. There may be engines to balance with shields and weapon energy, complex controls that try to make you feel like you're really keeping track of as many subsystems that might be necessary in an actual ship. I'm not sure there's any Starfighter sim that would match the attention to detail that's possible in something like Microsoft Flight Simulator, long one of the gold standards for aircraft sims, but that might be because Starfighters are, unfortunately, not real. On the other end of the spectrum are the arcade Starfighter games, where controls are simplified and ships and systems usually take a back seat to the space combat itself. On this end of the pool would be games like Star Wars Starfighter or the aforementioned Freelancer, which was infamously easy enough to control with just a mouse. Now that gaming has had several decades to broaden its horizons, and since we've unfortunately moved into an era where Starfighter games rarely get the AAA treatment, even the excellent recent Star Wars Squadrons lean more AA than AAA, I wanted to take a brief look at 3 recent Starfighter games to examine how they've innovated in different ways on the traditional design philosophies behind starship combat, and some of their striking similarities. We're going to be focusing on games where piloting a ship is the main mechanic, so sorry to anyone who might be expecting something like Battlefront or No Man's Sky. No spreadsheet simulators either, so that leaves out things like EVE Online or Elite Dangerous. The first 2 games we'll actually look at are a couple of indie titles, the first being House of the Dying Sun from 2016 and Marauder Interactive, then 2021's Chorus, developed by Deep Silver. Finally, I'll look at the aforementioned Star Wars Squadrons from 2020 to see how the big devs are still doing it. So, how does spaceship combat typically work in a game? Back in the beginning, it was often a sort of camera on a track, and you would aim and shoot at targets as they came flying by, much like light gun games such as Time Crisis or House of the Dead. Later games began to give you more freedom, with 360 degrees of control and full maps to fly around, as well as beginning to give you access to various subsystems like thrust and shields. There are often two types of health to manage in Starfighter games: an armored hull that takes a long time to repair, if it can be repaired at all during a mission, paired with shields that recharge pretty quickly and are how you take the brunt of your attacks coming your way. As freedom of movement and systems grew in depth, you also began to have a wider variety of perspective choices. One of the quintessential distinctions in any space game is the choice between first and third-person view. Some games let you choose and work well from either perspective, while others might be meant to be played one way but give you options to toggle back and forth. Others restrict you to one or the other. I hear the in-cockpit view can be truly stunning in VR games. There are some exceptions and outliers here, but I can see this piece easily spiraling out to novel length if I go through all the various options given to you by all the games that have come out over the last 3 or 4 decades. We'd be here all day, and I don't want to reinstall that many games just for a few seconds of footage each, especially since getting into the weeds would sooner or later end up with us discussing which Wing Commander is better, if there's a more effective set of horror monsters than Old Scratch and the Thief ships in Descent 3, or some other obscure nonsense like the intricacies of the Star Wars Millennium Falcon playset, and even if my dad hung on to the physical playset, it'll be in a box somewhere in New England, far out of my reach. Let's try and get back on track, shall we? House of the Dying Sun puts you in a vastly different role from the plucky young farm boy who runs off to join the Rebel Alliance and take down the evil Empire. Nor is this the world of TIE Fighter, where you're a cog in the Emperor's machine of domination near the height of the Empire's ascendance. Here, you're both the plucky underdog and a cog in the machine of the evil Empire. This game's intro is a stark message. The Emperor is dead, and you're going to do something about those upstart rebels. The training mission is in the Empire's last stronghold, and introduces you to the mechanics of House's way of doing business. In each of these games, I'm going to be discussing their control scheme as played on a PC with a gamepad, since that's likely how most people are going to be interacting with them. I've almost always favored joysticks and gamepads for my flight games over a mouse and keyboard anyway. This is where I mentioned Freelancer again. Don't even think about talking to me unless your y-axis is inverted either, so that's the way Space Jesus intended us to play dogfighting games when he wrote the Space Commandments in the Space Bible. I don't make up the rules here, people, I just follow them. The training mission in the Empire's last stronghold introduces you to the mechanics of House's way of doing business. The subsystems you get in your fighter are as follows: 2 main weapons that each need to be manually reloaded, a basic comm system to help you target other ships and larger ships' subsystems, your shields, and your armor. Weapons auto-lock on targets, but need to be within a certain range for the targeting system to be effective. As you gain ships to add to your small fleet, you can issue commands to them, but you'll only ever have the choice to control one of your basic single-man fighters. Before each mission begins, you can assign various weapons and subsystems to your growing flotilla, tuning each ship class to prepare for the hunts ahead. On the realism scale, even with all of the customization options, I'd put this game more on the arcade side of things as opposed to a sim, while still being close to the middle of that spectrum. In terms of controlling your fighter, like most space games, space movies, and space TV shows, space is treated much more like you're flying a plane in a planet's atmosphere. There's a lot of complicated sciencey stuff behind the difference in depiction, but the most important aspect from a mechanics perspective is that your momentum acts like you're in an environment with much more friction. Throttling up your engine makes you move faster, cutting it back slows you down. Where in the actual vacuum of space, you would have to introduce thrust in the opposite direction of your travel to actually cut down on your speed in that direction. Also, dogfighting almost always takes place at much closer quarters to what space combat might actually end up looking like. Under the influence of real physics, it's likely that ship combat would take place at ranges far too vast to be able to see your targets, and weapons could take minutes or even hours to connect. Going through a battle where you never actually get to see any of your targets because of the vast distances involved might not be the most visually engaging game, though. Just about every space combat game does bring you close enough to wave at your enemies and ignores some of the actual physics involved. However, All three of the games we're discussing here have a drifting system of some kind that actually lets you treat space a little more like space. In House of the Dying Sun, I'll call the drift potential a medium, as there's a button for drifting that's effective, but you could easily go through your first playthrough without relying on it much, if at all. I'll touch on the drifting systems of the other two games as we get to them. Past the mechanics of piloting the ship, the first thing to get out of the way is that the sound design on this game is superlative. It's an amazing compromise between the overwhelming silence of the vacuum of space and a dynamic soundscape. Ragged breathing of your pilot, the muffled roar of your engines and dampened reports of your weapons, the crack of railguns and ships breaking in two are all stellar. I love how even the chatter you get over the comms is muffled and distant. It conveys important information and is still very intelligible while lining up with what the rest of the soundscape accomplishes. The soundtrack is also a great complement to the other aspects of the sound design, the thumping drums and ominous drones adding some excitement, but tinged with enough dread to enhance the sense that you're bringing ruin to your enemies, and that might not be the best thing for the galaxy. The game can be played in VR, and I can only imagine what the soundscape would contribute to the added immersion VR glasses would bring. The graphics are clearly that of a smaller studio, but I really like what's on display here, a good example of the art design trumps graphical muscle maxim. Each battlefield has a strong color scheme and evocative backdrops, and the ship designs are all varied and attractive, even if they don't stray too far from the fighter, frigate, capital ship school of thought. Space stations and weapons platforms are scattered throughout the combat zones as well. This adds welcome variety to your missions. There are also subtle touches in the graphics to help reinforce the idea that you're an enforcer for a tyrannical government, the most obvious of which is that the targets that you engage are all marked up in blue. This is a clever way to play with the expectations of anyone who ends up playing the game. Even a cursory knowledge of how games are designed will have someone conditioned to expect enemies to be highlighted in red. Nearly every objective in the game screams evil at you. The meta progression is similar to other games in terms of how you grow in strength from mission to mission, and every objective you complete earns you some new resource. This could be a new ship to add to your small fleet, or upgrade points to equip different weapons and internal systems. The ways that you go about earning those upgrades, though, are pretty clearly heinous. Many of the bonus objectives are also about causing as much extra suffering as possible. Sometimes it will be to just take out some extra support ships assisting your target. Sometimes, while tracking down some important adjutant, you'll be tasked to slaughter civilians or the families of those who betrayed the Emperor. So many games that give you the option to be evil also give you the chance to be good, and my Paragon for Life ass can hardly ever bring itself to choose evil when I can be good instead. In this game, there is no choice, and getting into that mindset of righteous fury as you fill the sky with the burning wrecks of traitors and heretics is disturbingly satisfying. The final two missions really drive that point home. It's time to take the fight to the last bastion of the Resistance, and there will be no liberation here. Your objective is to help one of your capital ships stay alive while it burns the planet below to cinders. This is a full-on exterminatus, and there's no convenient excuse of flood outbreak, chaos infiltration, or tyrannid infestation to excuse your actions here. No, here there is simply a planet full of people being reduced to ash. Congrats, you've won. Just looking at the action, Chorus makes a hell of a first impression. Despite the odd spelling of its title, Chorus is pronounced the way you would normally say it. In many ways, it could almost be a direct sequel of sorts to House of the Dying Sun. You play, wait for it, an elite pilot of an evil empire who has defected and gone into hiding after committing an atrocity in the name of her prophet, namely burning an entire planet and killing billions of people. Sound familiar? You don't even just glass the planet in this one. The main character opens a giant rift in space that tears a good deal of the planet away. The place the story begins in is sort of like if Kylo Ren had been the one to personally flick the switch on Starkiller Base, then pieced out to spend some time as a junk scavenger on Jakku to get away from his demons. This game is much more story-focused for good and ill, and your pilot Nara gets quite a bit of development and interaction with other characters over the course of the game as she's drawn back into conflict with her former cult, and has to decide whether or not to take a stand. Obvious differences to House of the Dying Sun are that this game is in third person, is semi-open world, and that the game was clearly made with a much larger team and a more significant budget. This is still not a AAA game by any stretch, as Nara, the main character, is the only person who gets a fully animated character model, and all the other characters are portrayed by voice and 2D character portraits. While many of the voice actors do good work here, and Nara's actor does more than a passable job with the script that she's been given, several side characters throughout the story are of more varying quality. You'll also have to get used to Nara whisper-speaking her thoughts in reaction to conversations and events, so your tolerance for that type of dialogue might vary.
They massacred everyone, even the kids.
A circle cleansing doctrine. Thorough.
Who betrayed them?
Never found out.
A power cell. If the circle doesn't find us, I can still reach out with my right of senses and find them. They must never know about my right. About me.
Nara's ship and abilities are also treated very differently from House. For one thing, the ship has an intelligent AI named Forza, who is Nara's primary dialogue partner throughout the game.
More faceless ahead. They've already materialized.
Then we should make them disappear.
Her ship is also kitted out to channel special powers called rights that she's been granted that are some kind of
Star Trek.
psychokinetic reality warping abilities, essentially magic, which is of course what all sufficiently advanced tech appears to be. With the first of these powers, Nara can send out a pulse that highlights items and locations, making her a distant descendant of Lara Croft, Batman, most of the Assassin's Creed protagonists, among many others. Second, one of the inherent pains/pleasures of any dogfighting game is the struggle to maneuver behind your targets and line up the kill shot. The second of Nara's abilities simply teleports you behind whatever poor sap you can see. This is almost always a guaranteed kill. Third is a targeted burst of an EMP that obliterates shields and sends the targeted ship careening out of control, hopefully into a convenient asteroid. The final right turns your ship into a charged battering ram that obliterates most things in your path. Definitely my personal favorite, especially once upgraded. There's an 11th hour ability you gain that I won't spoil, but it came so late in the story that I only got to experiment with it for a short time, not nearly enough to get a full sense of its gameplay potential. Just like House of the Dying Sun, all weapons have an effective range with your ship providing a bit of lock-on assistance when you're within striking distance. Also like House, Nara's ship can drift, which is still essentially the let's make space work like space button. It's much more integral to the combat here than it is in House, and you can pull off some really stunning moves while drifting. If you manage to drift through the innards of a capital ship while tearing through its systems, you'll come out the other side feeling pretty satisfied with yourself, with a flaming wreck to gaze back on as well. One of my favorite mechanics in any of these games. There are also internal ship components to collect and upgrade. Unlike House of the Dying Sun and Star Wars Squadrons, many of these components actually come in named sets, where equipping multiple parts from the same set will give you a bonus of some kind. None of these were attractive enough to make them worth building around for me, as I found that equipping the guns with the highest numbers and the parts that increased those numbers usually were the quickest way to victory. With all of these extra-dimensional abilities, lack of subsystems to keep track of during combat, and the fact that you can occasionally pick up floating green orbs to restore your health after you've downed an enemy fighter, this game places itself firmly on the arcade side of the spectrum. While there's a lot to admire about Chorus, and the feel of combat really is stellar, there are a lot of smaller and larger issues that became evident to me as I played and ended up really being points of friction. This isn't strictly speaking within the comparative lens of examining the mechanics, but I really need to discuss this. One of the foundational issues that stuck with me was the inconsistencies in the narrative presentation. The world and concepts that the designers came up with are in many ways evocative and intriguing, but the game almost seems to work overtime to hold you at arm's length. One of the main structural problems has to do with the main characters. Both Nara and her ship Forza have already spent most of their existence as keystones in galactic events, and all of the complicated politics and metaphysics of Chorus's universe are deeply familiar to them in a way that precludes them from ever having the chance to explain things to the audience. There are so many times when one will comment on some aspect of the plot or other characters to the other, and then the game will just move on. There are several times when critical characters or factions are introduced, characters who have long histories with Nara without any build-up or foreshadowing, and the game will again just move on. What I think was desperately needed here, besides some deeper thinking about how to introduce plot and world-building concepts, is a codex. Aside from introducing a newcomer to the conflict character Nara could explain some of the core ideas to, a codex is often a decent way to fill in holes created in a world's narrative. When I think back to a series like Mass Effect that also had characters that were not newcomers to many aspects of the future they were living in, the games still did such an admirable job of explaining new concepts to players in intuitive and thoughtful ways. I also think of its excellent codex, which deepened the lore and universe while also serving as a handy reminder for when a refresher was needed about terms and factions. The tortured metaphor I came up with for how the story of Chorus made me feel was like I was driving down a highway with a parallel but separate lane going in the same direction about 50 yards away, maybe with some scattered trees here and there in the middle. I'm in my lane, Chorus's story is in the other, except maybe 20 feet ahead. I can see it, I have a pretty good idea of where it's going, and I can even hear the music it's playing over its speakers when I have my windows down, but I can't even tell how many people are inside the damn car, let alone read the license plate number. The game's final mission draws many threads together in a surprisingly effective way, and the mission itself is a blast, but it was the sort that I wish had been more prevalent in the rest of the game, and the journey there was actively frustrating at times. Some other minor details feel like small bits of sand creating friction in a larger machine. A story issue that is one of the main contributing factors to that feeling of being held at arm's length is that sometimes when you're traveling around a system, exploring or on your way to a new mission, some dialogue will begin between Nara and some other character that will fill in a bit of backstory or provide some emotional or historical context to current events. Another thing that can happen as you're flying around is a randomly generated side mission that pops up for you to choose to complete. Fight off some pirates, salvage some cargo, hunt down some patrolling enemies, or the like. These missions popping up supersede any other dialogue you might be listening to. The context-filled side conversations only ever play once. Starting to see the potential problem? It felt like 9 times out of 10 I'd be listening to some heartfelt or revelatory conversation and only getting half or 2/3 of the dialogue before they'd be cut off by a random encounter popping up and making me permanently miss whatever was being said. Thinking about the scale of Chorus, I really like the maps for each individual explorable sector, but the overworld map really makes it feel like you're scrapping over one solar system as opposed to fighting back against a galaxy-spanning empire. My one gripe about the system map has to do with specificity, and that is that there's no counter for how many missions you've finished versus how many you have left, or how many important collectibles might be left. There's an upgrade system for your rights, your magic attacks, but what each upgrade does was never explained to me. Nara only ever comments on how her power has increased. I think I was able to eventually figure it out from the menu, but the system is far too opaque for how well the game does at introducing each new ability. My last scale issue is that I really wish there had been more larger capital ships for me to fly inside of and dismantle. Finally, I'm piloting one of the most advanced spaceships ever designed by humankind, wielding powers that have been magnified by access to another dimension, and my missiles only lock on if I'm within a few meters of a target? Many of these smaller issues are only annoyances, but they do add up. Combined with the larger issues of story and lore presentation, they made my playthrough of Chorus actively frustrating at times. Not at the game being bad, which is not something I think, but that the game was failing to live up to its potential in some really disappointing ways. Then I'd scream through a crowd of enemy fighters, leaving them all dust in my wake, or perfectly drifting through the innards of some superstructure, and I'd be reminded of why my expectations had been raised so high in the first place. The final missions also really do help the game to go out on a high note. What's this? Multiple fully rendered character models? Multiple ships to fly and admire? Multiplayer? Such decadence, there must be Disney money at play here. While going into a Star Wars game might instantly bring to mind the idea that you'd be playing as either the plucky upstart rebels or the galaxy-dominating Empire, unless the prequels get involved, Star Wars Squadrons actually moves quickly away from the David versus Goliath model that earlier Star Wars games helped to codify for a generation. While the opening tutorial missions are set soon after the destruction of Alderaan, the story quickly jumps to a few years after the Battle of Endor, with the New Republic working to establish its footing in the galaxy as the fractured forces of the Imperial Remnant squabble and fight each other almost as much as they do the Republic. You get to play as two customizable characters, one a member of Vanguard Squadron fighting for the New Republic, and the other a new addition to Titan Squadron flying for the Empire. You switch perspectives every few missions or so, as both sides work to thwart the plans of the other. It's a decent story, and it's nice to see a Star Wars game set in a period that hasn't gotten as much attention since the canon reset. R.I.P. Mara Jade. One of the problems that the devs set for themselves with this campaign is that, by alternating between the Republic and the Empire, and by entwining the two stories around each other, it was going to be very difficult to have both sides come out with a win without engendering the feeling that the efforts of both sides were just canceling each other out. Plus, there would have to be a lot of contrived reasons for why the two squads never actually face off against one another. The game does a reasonably good job of threading this needle, and providing wins to both sides without ending the story in a zero-sum scenario. I have to admit that I thought the win for the Imperial side combined with the reasons for Titan Squad to leave the plot were a tad contrived, but at least I got the chance to commit some horrifying war crimes against civilians along the way. There are a lot of Easter eggs, references, and cameos for the attentive fan here too. General Syndulla, Pazak, Chandrilla, Wedge, played by his original actor, Iden Versio, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Mon Cala. Maybe Squadrons is a little too eager to name drop. It's like someone at a party trying to impress someone with how they met Josh Groban and Neil Gaiman. It could almost come across as desperate. From a mechanics perspective, Squadrons easily wins the most complex award, being the closest of the games to the simulation side of things, while still being accessible. Situated in first person like House of the Dying Sun, this is the only game where you get multiple ships to pilot, and several of the missions actually let you choose which craft you prefer from the beginning. Each ship class fulfills a different function. The X-Wing and Standard TIE Fighter are good all-rounders, ships that don't excel in any specific scenario but have a good balance of stats. The A-Wing and TIE Interceptor are your dogfighting specialists that can't really stand up to capital ships, etc. Each class of ship feels quite different to pilot as well. You're going to have a lot more maneuverability in an A-Wing than a U-Wing, and a lot more damage-soaking potential in TIE Reaper than a regular TIE. There are many different subsystems to tweak to your preferences, and this is all before you even enter combat. While inside the cockpit, there are several systems that require active management and proper juggling in order to succeed, and depending on the ship class you're using, there will be engines, weapons, and possibly shields to balance. You have much more control over your velocity here, much more nuance than the go and go faster of the other two games. You can equalize your systems for a level approach, but learning how to switch between your systems as the situation calls for it can really give you a boost. Divert power to engines to reach a ship that's under attack all the faster. Switch main power to your weapon systems as you line up behind an enemy fighter to bring them down in one concentrated volley. Boost your shields and turn them to the rear as you finish a bombing run on a capital ship to absorb the hail of turret fire coming at you in retaliation. There's drifting here too, although it's the hardest version to execute out of all 3 games. You need to focus power on the engines to build up a boost meter, and then, while boosting, you can pull off a drift. I have a feeling this system was designed primarily for the multiplayer side of the game, to give ace pilots an extra advantage, as opposed to a mechanic meant to be pivotal for the campaign. You do get insanely detailed cockpits to goggle at here, and the systems blend in really well to make everything look like actual instruments. This is another game that can be played in VR, and I'm sure it's quite the experience. Honestly, my one real complaint that I had in my time with Squadrons campaign, besides the fact that there were less superstructure innards to fly through than I would have liked, an issue I seem to have with almost all space games, was from one single moment in the game. During a mission in the Xavian Abyss, with asteroids scattered in clusters thick enough to choke an Exogorth, and electricity, or plasma, unsure, arcing through the periphery, watching the Victorum, an Imperial II class Star Destroyer, jump to light speed in the middle of all that mess was mind-bogglingly immersion-breaking. Now, this is my inner nitpicker coming out, I know, but when Han freaking Solo, of all people, says in the first Griffin Star Wars movie, and I quote, "Traveling through hyperspace ain't like dusting crops, farm boy. Without precise calculations, we could fly right through a star or bounce too close to a supernova and that'd end your trip real quick, wouldn't it?" Doesn't that rather imply that jumping to hyperspace in the middle of an asteroid field might cause more than a bit of scrape paint off the hull? God, and then in the sequel movie series, when they're jumping through multiple planet atmospheres, I may be getting slightly off topic again. Let's get off this high horse and look at multiplayer. The 2 main modes are straight dogfighting and a MOBA-esque fleet battle match where squads of 5 human players fly alongside AI ships in a tug-of-war against the enemy team in an attempt to fight their way to the enemy capital ship and destroy it. I really enjoy this mode, although several years out past the game's release date, the servers are pretty dead, and the game doesn't let you fill up your pilot side with AI bots, even though you can play against an entire enemy team of bots as one of the standard modes. I attempted to go up against this full team with just myself and a friend, and let me tell you, it's unfair far beyond the point of frustration. It's a shame such an obvious option wasn't included. You can tweak settings on various faction dials, like shield strength and capital ship health, so we were able to find a way to even the odds while still being completely outnumbered, but it's a real shame.
Why the f*** am I so slow?
When comparing the mechanics of these games side by side, I'm not sure I feel all that inclined to pick a winner in terms of who does it best. Setting and story aside, each game's core control components work really well in the confines of what they're being asked to accomplish. House of the Dying Sun feels like the most complete experience to me, likely the result of being developed by the smaller studio. It was also the only game out of the 3 where I kept coming back even after I'd beaten the final mission, eager for more. Chorus had the highest highs and the lowest lows. When you were in the middle of combat, screaming your song of destruction as enemy hulls cracked open around you, the game truly achieved something magnificent, but the many issues I described before could really turn other parts of it into a slog. The finale put forward much of what made it so good, and I wish more of the game had been able to match those final moments. Squadrons is certainly the most polished title and gives you the most options, but having all of those systems to juggle at once was sometimes more than I wanted to handle in a given scenario. Still a really great game and clearly crafted with care and dedication, especially, A-Wings, my god, best subfighter ever, come and fight me. But when it comes to arcade versus simulation, gun to my head, I'd play Rogue Squadron before TIE Fighter. Gosh, I'm excited to see the polite and civil discussions about my opinions in the comments section. I can honestly and heartily recommend all of these games to anyone who has any interest in space combat. All 3 have interesting takes on modernizing how dogfighting works, even if in the midst of their original ideas, many of those solutions, like how all 3 implement variations on the drifting mechanic, are solving similar problems in similar ways. I'd certainly also be very happy to see sequels to each game come out. I'd want to see the ideas the devs came up with iterated on and refined even further. Regardless, it felt damn good to be behind the controls of all of those starfighters. I know this genre has become more niche as gaming has expanded its boundaries ever outwards, but here's hoping that there will continue to be studios out there willing to experiment and push the envelope on what's possible out amongst the stars. My fellow pilots, good hunting. House of the Dying Sun is available on the PC. Chorus is available on the Xbox One, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series X and Series S, Microsoft Windows, Google Stadia, and Amazon Luna. Star Wars Squadrons is available on the PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and Series S, and Microsoft Windows. So that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it entertaining, informative, and maybe, just maybe, a little funny. Just a little. Anyway, I would love to hear what you think down in the comment section. What is your favorite Starfighter? Do I need to meet anybody out in the street for a duel over their opinions on Starfighters and Starfighter games? I certainly am excited to read what everybody thinks. I'm so excited to finally be able to put out new videos again. It's been too long. Hopefully we'll be able to do more faster as the year goes on. If you like this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please consider checking out my Patreon or buying me a coffee. I'm explicitly putting out that any money that I receive from YouTube or Patreon or anything like that this year is going specifically towards upgrading my rig, which is doing all right, but it's getting a little bit long in the tooth, so I'd love to be able to get some more powerful stuff to get some of the newer games looked at and out to you guys. All right, well, with that being said, I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you're doing all right, and I'll see you in the next one. How many of us have ever wanted to pilot a starfighter? That dream of spaceflight merged with the promise of science fiction in one personalized cockpit. To go through the pre-flight checklist at the controls of a small, sleek, maneuverable craft like an X-Wing, maybe to help Luke Skywalker out of the Battle of Yavin, though maybe not as Porkins or Biggs, or to dive through capital ships in a Star Fury to keep Babylon 5 safe from the third phase. I'm really making this paragraph hard for myself. Many of my earliest gaming memories are of Starfighter games. Rail shooting in Rebel Assault, memorizing routes to get gold medals in Rogue Squadron, getting motion sickness... Just gonna choke on my tongue here, hang on. On the other end of the spectrum are the arcade Starfighter games, where controls are simplified and shimps... What is a shimp?